and gentlemen, welcome to the most ambitious crossover event of all time. That's right. Step aside Avengers Infinity War. Step aside That's So Sweet Life of Hannah Montana. Step aside Allen Iverson breaking Tyronn Lue's ankles. Today, Jonathan, Safi, and I are going to be doing an episode of Corn Things and Double Take all in one. What does that mean exactly? Other than that, we're going to be posting the podcast on Double Take SoundCloud account and on Apple Podcasts and Spotify through Corn Things. Well, nothing really. But anyways, get ready. John, what are we talking about today?
First, my name's not Jonathan, it's John. Second, I don't remember the Hannah Montana Sweet Life. Did they
Dude,
really
that
do
was, you don't remember that? That
They
was
did
like,
Zach and Cody with Hannah Montana.
it was a staple of our childhood. They brought Hannah Montana to the
I have
Tipton
no
Hotel.
recollection of that at all. But today we do have a great episode. Obviously, today's Monday, or Tuesday, rather. Today's Tuesday, 4 p.m. right now is when we're recording this. And 2 days ago, a Sunday night, was the last installment, episodes 9 and 10, of the Jordan Bulls documentary, which... what everyone during this time of quarantine due to the coronavirus was everyone was itching to be watching some sports, so this gave sports fans a great thing to watch.
Nice
over,
5 weeks.
Yeah,
got 5
over
weeks of sports.
10 episodes. So we will be discussing all things related to that documentary. We haven't done an episode in a long time. Alex and I were finishing up our online classes, and actually this week we just got our wisdom teeth out too. But we're going to be getting into our 6 takeaways from the documentary. Would the 1999 Bulls have repeated if they kept the team together? I'm sorry, what did I say?
You said repeat.
Would they have four-peated if they kept the team together? We're going to talk about our favorite people, scenes, and quotes from the documentary. We're going to revisit the GOAT conversation, which is definitely, I can't say, it's been reopened because
it's ramped up for sure.
I wouldn't say that because it's always been open, Dude,
I don't know. It's on steroids now.
Right. And lastly, we will discuss the next documentary that we think ESPN should make about any NBA player. But first, Alex.
So, here we go with the first topic.
Kick it off with your first takeaway.
Our 6 biggest takeaways from the documentary. Obviously 6. Jordan has 6 rings. Pretty poetic. You like that. So we'll go every other.
Leo DiCaprio.
I'll start. Oh yeah, Leo. So I'll start with my biggest takeaway from the documentary. This one's a pretty basic one. Nothing too groundbreaking. Michael Jordan is the greatest winner in any sport. So, what stands out from his career is obviously 6 for 6. It's something that the MJ GOAT argument supporters will always bring up first in his argument, is that he was 6 for 6, which is obviously just crazy, because if you go to the all-time greatest NBA players of all time and you go down the list, so obviously everyone knows LeBron's record is 3 and 6. Kareem was 6 and 4. Even Bill Russell, he was 11 and 1. He lost 1. Magic lost 4 finals. Bird lost 2. Duncan even won 1. He was 5 and 0 I guess he was 4 and 0. He lost 2013. Yeah, so he lost 1. Shaq lost 2. Kobe lost 2. The list goes on. But if you really look at the top list of players of all time, none of them has 0 final losses. None of the top 10, 15 have 0 finals losses. So that will always be one of the biggest reasons why I think is the greatest winner, not only in basketball but in sports. And then the thing that I took away from this was in episode 10 with that Jazz game Jazz Game 6, 1998. You really just see that I think that's probably MJ's greatest game, and he literally just willed them to win.
Believe that.
And that made me think he's the greatest winner in any sport, because that was when you saw Pippen had a lot of back issues and he couldn't play the whole game pretty much. Or he played the whole game,
but he said he was the decoy.
Yeah, he was a decoy. He wasn't doing much. I think he scored like 4, 6. I don't know. He did not score a lot of points in that game. And so Jordan was by far like the only offensive threat on that Bulls team, because they weren't really going to go to Kukoc much, and Rodman's obviously not an offensive player at all. So Jordan, and then that's what I think he talks about right after in the interviews is he was saying, I was most proud of that win just because it wasn't just him relying on his absurd athleticism and skill. It was more that he had to use his mind to to be able to pace himself that game and pull out the win. So I think that's my first takeaway. Jordan was the greatest winner of all sports.
Yeah, I definitely think that also. I mean, listen, I wasn't alive in the 90s watching these games, but just of all the ones I've heard of, the flu games up there, or like the shot that he had against the Cavaliers to win in Game 5 of that series in his early
89.
Yeah, early in his career. You hear about all these great games. The game he dropped 62 against the 86 Celtics, which are arguably
63.
Huh?
You said 62.
63, right? Arguably against the 86 Celtics, who are arguably one of the greatest teams ever, top 3 maybe. And out of all those games, I do think, like, just hearing about people talk about, on ESPN and podcasts that I listened to in the documentary, it does seem like that is his greatest game, especially, the sequence in, like, the last 40 seconds. I was just, shocked there because I'd never seen the game. And at the end, they show, John Stockton hits that 3, the Jazz take the lead, and it's like 41 seconds left.
They call it timeout.
What are they going to do? The timeout. And I'm like, wow, in this next 40 seconds, we know MJ's going to go bucket, get the steal. He's going to strip Karl Malone, and then get that last shot, which obviously, everyone who pretty much knows about that one. And so I think that last sequence is just incredible watching, and like how he basically, I mean, Bill Simmons talked about it in his last podcast. Like, he said he's seen LeBron. LeBron got to this point in 2018 where he was just very aware of, as the greatest player on his team and on the court, he was aware of like what he had to do to get his team to win. He was going to have to play this many minutes, and he was going to have to rest during the second quarter and like guard this guy, or he was going to have to shoot this many shots and so on. And that's basically what, Jordan talked about. It wasn't just about like all his body and what he was doing physically. It was about his mind, right? And so I think that's just something that it's one of the greatest sports performances that we've ever seen.
All right, what's the next takeaway?
So my next takeaway was that, obviously the documentary isn't just about Michael Jordan, although he is the main reason that the documentary, he's the one reason that it did happen. But the story about the Bulls' greatness is about more than just having MJ. That was one of my takeaways. And the thing that I saw with all those Bulls teams, from the front office down, is that they all knew what Bill Simmons, who he's someone that, I've read his books, I listen to his podcast all the time. Bill Simmons, he's the CEO, right, of The Ringer. In his book, he wrote the book of basketball in 2010, and one of his first chapters, I think, before he gets into, all his greatest players, the greatest teams of all time, all that in his book, he talks about the secret, he talks about
of basketball, right?
Right, the secret that he thinks all championship teams have had. And he talks about when he met Isaiah Thomas, who was like mad at him because Bill Simmons had like trashed him for being a horrible GM of the New York Knicks. And the secret is basically that it's not about basketball, right? And that it's about all the guys embracing their roles and coming together and putting aside their egos and the money and all that stuff, and coming together and embracing their roles. Whether that's Dennis Rodman saying, I'm just gonna be the best rebounder and defensive player and do all that, and I'm not gonna care about how many shots I'm shooting, or if that's Steve Kerr and John Paxton saying like, we're gonna be the guy waiting in the corner that when MJ is gonna pass that shot to us, we have to be ready. And that's something I love that Steve Kerr mentioned. He's like, I only had 4 shots a game as a role player, and I knew that if my margin for error was so small, if I messed up, it was gonna show a lot more. Whereas Jordan was shooting 20 shots a game. If he missed one, it wasn't as big of a deal. Or the biggest one I think of is like Scottie Pippen, for example, right? He had to be number 2 for his whole career. And who knows, like towards the end, obviously he got upset, and we're going to definitely get into that and why the team had to break up. And he was upset about the money, and he probably feels somewhat, like he could have probably been a number 1 guy on other teams, whereas he was the greatest number 2 I think we've seen ever that complemented Jordan so well. So I think that was my big takeaway, was that it was about having all these great glue guys and role players, and again, an all-time great coach. So it was about the all-time great coach, the all-time great number 2 in Scottie Pippen, and the all-time great role players that team had, and it concocted at what I think is the greatest team all time, at least up to that point before, the 2017 Golden State Warriors.
Stacked team. Whoopsies.
All right, Alex, what is your next takeaway?
So takeaway number 3. It's kind of a good segue because you talked about it's not those championships wasn't just Jordan, it was more about their team. Yeah. So this one I don't think this will be too hot of a take, but my takeaway, our third takeaway is Jerry Krause, flaws and all, was a great GM. And so the reason I think this is because obviously you just mentioned how great not just Jordan was in those years. That's undisputable. Jordan was great, but the teams, from their number 2 on down were always really, really, Jordan was always well surrounded with a bunch of good glue guys, as you said. So the reason I'm crediting Krause, although the document doesn't give him much credit at all.
Yeah. He's obviously the bad guy.
Yeah, definitely the bad guy, which I'll talk about that too. But anyway, is just how many guys we see with just incredible talent, they have the all-time great potential, and so many years of their prime get flushed down the toilet just because of the managerial incompetence or even like unluckiness. Like basically, it's very hard to surround a great player with.
And
with
LeBron played 7 years with the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah, so we've seen LeBron with a lot of those teams that he had.
Never
in his
had
early,
a great number 2 like Scott. He never had a great coach like Phil Jackson. Obviously.
Yeah, until he went to Miami, then he came back. But LeBron, so those early years in his career, Kobe spent a good amount of those years in between having Shaq and before they ended up with Gasol, Bynum, and all the other guys on that, or Lamar Odom on those championship teams. So Kobe had some years in there. Like the year he scored 81, the Lakers weren't even good that year.
Even the year that he was an MVP, I think it was like 05, or it was 06, I think.
No, I think it was
one of those years in there, but it was when they weren't even that great of a team.
Yeah. So, and the list goes on of just guys we've seen. But with Jordan, within a few years, obviously his first years weren't great either. But, I mean, and the doc portrays those early Bulls teams, right, when Jordan gets drafted as, a circus of cocaine and just, like, it was very unprofessional. But Krause comes in, and he does something that no one really talks about. But Pippen, they talked about how he came from a small school. He wasn't a super highly coveted prospect in the NBA draft. He takes Pippen at number 5, which obviously you can't even speak enough about. I mean, they don't win those championships without Pippen.
And obviously, and I don't know if you know, but they also took a player who was obviously very important for the first repeat. They also drafted Horace Grant in that draft.
They drafted Grant, so that was important.
So getting Pippen and Horace Grant, the second and third best players of their three-peat, which that's very important. That is what Krause did.
Exactly. And then another thing was he drafted Charles Oakley the year after he drafted Jordan. And with a lot of GMs, when you draft a few young players, it seems like they almost get attached and they always want to hang on to them and hope that it works out. But with Oakley, he made a great trade, which he traded Oakley, who Jordan liked, so I'm sure that was a hard decision, and he traded Oakley for Bill Cartwright, who
they needed a center.
Yeah, they needed a bigger, more defensive-minded center. So that ended up being huge for them in their first repeat, just as drafting Pippen and Horace Grant. And then also the huge other thing was that with Doug Collins, I guess the documentary didn't gloss over it too much, but I remember in the beginning
they showed. I think that he was a great coach. And Michael liked him a lot.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Is
they shifted from being a player coach, like where everything was centered around MJ, to Phil and the triangle.
Exactly. So the first few episodes, it has Doug Collins, and I'm like, Doug Collins is awesome. Like, I wonder what's gonna happen. Like, I wonder why they don't keep him, because MJ clearly liked him. They had some success, but he fires Doug Collins and promotes Phil Jackson, which once again, Phil Jackson, arguably greatest coach of all time. So that was one more great thing that Krause did. And then one of the last things also is when they're describing Rodman after he leaves Detroit, a lot of teams didn't want anything to do with him. I think that was when he had the year with San Antonio, and San Antonio didn't really work out well. Right. And so the rest of the league was kind of like, oh, we don't want this guy. He's a head case. And then Krause signed Rodman, and everything works, which you have to give credit to MJ, Phil Jackson, and just like the structure of the team and keeping Rodman in line. But I think that was obviously so huge that they were able to get him, even though no one really liked him at the time.
Yeah,
so that's kind of my takeaway.
Yeah, I would definitely say, that's a good third takeaway to have. But one thing I guess I would slightly push back on is that, you said your takeaway was that Jerry Krause was a great GM.
Yep.
And my thing is, like, he did build, like, this beautiful house, right? But he was the one who let his own ego get in the way, and he burned it down in the end. So it was a great house that, in my opinion, they could have lived in that house for a few extra years towards the end. Maybe that's only one season, which we are going to get into that topic about the 1999 season. But I do think that a big stain on his legacy, as many smart decisions as Alex, as you just named, with Pippen and the coaching and getting Rodman and Horace Grant, all that, I just think that he can never be forgiven for being the reason that they burning the team down and burning the house down. And he, like, obviously, there's a lot of factors that came into it. He didn't like MJ and Scotty kind of bullied him. I mean, there was reasons for that stuff.
That's what
But he was the guy who said, "Listen, if Phil goes 82-0, he's not staying as the head coach." Like, where's the logic in that? It didn't make any sense.
Well, here's what I think, John. I think obviously what he did in '99 or '98 was an offseason '98. Doesn't really make sense. I can't really defend that. However, for me, that doesn't discount him building those 6 championship teams. Obviously, he did inherit Jordan when he was hired for the Bulls, but I think that he probably, I can't remember where I heard this, but he didn't get, let me think about it. Oh, he got less credit than he deserved, but he wanted more credit than he deserved also.
Oh, yeah.
Who said that? Was that in the documentary?
Yeah, no, it was.
Okay.
I want to say it was like David Aldridge, one of those guys that he didn't get the credit he deserved, but he wanted more than he deserved.
So I think in the documentary they kind of spent more time just bashing him and not like, because that's the one thing I was just looking. I was like, geez,
well, that's
look at these teams he put together. Even Jordan coming back, and for him to be able to get Rodman and turn that around, because that '95 team with the Bulls was not good enough to win.
Yeah, and that is like that you said they're trashing him a lot, and that is the theme of the documentary, right? Like they could have focused it on, I don't know, one of the other, like the first three-peat, or I'm not sure exactly, but they focused it very specifically on '98. It wasn't just this is MJ's career. The documentary is focused on the Last Dance, and that does kind of take me to my next takeaway, which was oftentimes the reasons that great teams don't reach their full potential is for non-basketball reasons, right? So talking about Jerry Krause in this way, it's like the reason that the team broke up wasn't about them not being a good enough basketball team. It wasn't that Scottie Pippen couldn't make enough shots, or that MJ wasn't, passing enough to the teammates,
or even that they got old,
right? Or that their coach didn't come up with enough good plays, and it had really nothing to do with it. And that's why I think that as I talked about in my first takeaway, was they were a perfectly constructed team from the number 1, 2, and 3 guys. They had the rebounders, they had the shot makers, Kerr and John Paxson, and they had this, and obviously they had great defensive players. But and all of that, it really had nothing. The storyline about how the team ends after the '98 season has nothing to do with basketball, right? It's about money and pride and the egos and the image and the fame and all this and the relationships and other non-basketball factors. But we were actually it was 2 nights ago, we were watching it, and we were sitting there with our sister Jana, who isn't very into sports. And she's sitting there asking us a million questions, right? Like, why do you break the team up? That's so stupid. And we're like, all right, Jen, just watch. And at the end, she goes, oh, it was just pride. And she's talking about toxic masculinity and how everyone's ego gets in the way. And I think that was interesting. With my sister, I think she had watched maybe 2 or 3 episodes with us. She basically took away what I think is the theme of it, of why the team breaks up. And it's because Jerry Krause didn't like MJ and Pippen and them and Phil getting all the credit, where he felt like he didn't get enough. And then he said, even though the team had a shot basically to win in '99, he was going to take it apart no matter what, even if they went 82-0. So I think that was a big takeaway that I took about, and that's just for sports in general. It depends a lot on all the other factors, the relationships within people in the organization, and money and ego and pride and the fame and all that stuff. So, Alex, what's the fifth takeaway?
All right, so the fifth takeaway, this is another kind of theme of not only the documentary but just sports in general, is that defense wins championships. And this is something we all have heard a ton of times. If you've played sports, if you've watched sports, whatever.
My middle school basketball coach was always yelling at us.
That's right. But I guess my takeaway also kind of, the more I was thinking about it is how that era compares to this era. And just noticing all the extremely low-scoring games that we saw especially the last two episodes.
How about the Jazz? The Jazz scored 54 in game 3.
The Jazz series. Well,
the Bulls just shut them down.
Yeah, the Bulls shut them down. They scored 50, but then we had a lot of games in the 70s and the 80s, which today, that's such an anomaly. You'd almost be less surprised if you saw double that score than if you saw that score in today's NBA. So, but looking at those Jordan championship teams, they're very different from the teams that we see win championships today in that they don't jump out with the offensive flashiness and the firepower that our great teams, today have. Instead, we had defense because just comparing, let's look at the last few championships. I'll skip over the Raptors because that's just a random one. But like the dynasty of the what's it called? The Warriors, they had Curry, they had Durant, and they had Klay Thompson. Those guys are just pure scorers. They just get buckets. And then before that, you had obviously the LeBron Cavs one, but you had guys like Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love. With these championships in the 90s,
on the defensive players.
Exactly. It was Michael Jordan, but then look at his surrounding players. It was Pippen, and then you had Grant, who both guys are great defensive players. They can play offense too, but even Pippen, you wouldn't call Pippen a scorer. The first thing you'll say about Pippen is just how great he was at defense. He was 10-time all NBA defensive team. Grant was also a great defender, and then that second three-peat, you had Rodman, you had Ron Harper's another great defender. And then early on, they had Bill Cartwright, too. I forgot to mention him. But so the guys that Jordan was surrounded with were defenders, which you don't see that in today's NBA. In today's NBA, everything is how many open shooters can we get? How many guys who can get buckets can we get? Like, I honestly think guys like Rodman was so great, so obviously he would probably be in the league.
Well, there's no guys like him. There's no guy that's just like, he's going to grab 20 rebounds again, or whatever, 15 rebounds
and go like 1 for 3.
And he's not going to shoot it all and just play great defense, And like, you definitely don't see that. And if you look at the big threes of today, and a lot of them are like, they have staggered, like, this player's great, strength points are another player's weak points, right? And they complement each other in that way. But if you just look at, like, MJ, Pippen, and Dennis Rodman, like, just 3 lockdown, like, all-time great defenders. And, like, looking at a team like that, I don't think we'll ever see, a team like that now. I mean, maybe with, like, you could say Kawhi, Paul George, Pat Beverly. I think that's probably pretty close to 3 guys, that in a starting lineup can all really defend really well. But, again, seeing it in that way was just so different than anything we see today. And there's a lot of reasons. Maybe it's because
I think the reason
of three-point shooting.
Yeah, I think
the way that also
you can't stop
the rules have changed, right? Like the bad boy Pistons wouldn't be able to be a successful team in today's NBA because their go-to, style of play was like being aggressive and physical and like knocking guys down. And like there's probably there's times where they're holding dudes down on a rebound or shoving a guy that didn't get called, back in the day in the 80s and 90s. Yeah. But nowadays, those calls are going to get called. And, Bill Laimbeer might foul out in, like, the second or third quarter.
It's true.
I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Maybe it's the way styles
teams
play.
would never make
the
their teams changes. Like that. They would, because they'll get just outscored. If you have a guy like Rodman on the court for an extended period of time, as great as he is at defense, the better offensive player will probably be able to make some shots, and at that point, Rodman's a liability in not being able to hit open shots.
I mean, I guess you just put him right on the baseline. He can make that open shot if they decide to double Jordan off him. But yeah. Okay, and then lastly, I think this is my last takeaway. This is the one I wanted to make it last because we're definitely gonna have to talk about this, but I think it was too much of a focus of what this documentary is about, and that is that the generations will always debate with each other and have emotional bias towards their GOAT. And I think that this documentary was taken as too much of an opportunity to just trash LeBron or look at today's NBA and say, oh yeah, look how great those teams in the 90s were, the Knicks and the Pistons and the Pacers and those physical teams, you'll never see that in today's NBA. Everyone's too soft, and the AAU generation, everyone just wants to play together and whatever. And I think that, I just think it was too negative about today's generation. So you know what? Like, that's fine. If you hate today's NBA, then don't watch it. But again, getting back to my point about, the LeBron, because not only trashing today's generation, but today's, great player who is LeBron, he's this generation's Jordan, right? And just the opportunity that people listen, it's when it's Skip Bayless tweeting something because he wants people to watch the show, I'm okay, that's for viewership.
Yeah, he's going for the shock.
He's gonna say some outlandish stuff like, he said the documentary was the last dance for LeBron's GOAT case, stuff like, okay, that's just funny, he's in media and he's playing to the sensationalism of the documentary, right? And he wants to get more viewership, so he's going to say stuff that's going to outrage people because then more people will tune in and watch. And I'm okay with that stuff. But, just even in general, just hearing older people talk about, like the older generation talk about it, it's like, if they say, listen, MJ's 1, LeBron's 2, that's it. But it's when I hear, like, for example, our Uncle Jordan, who he thinks LeBron's not even top 10 all the time. Like, LeBron's horrible. Like, when I hear this type of stuff, I'm just like, there's no point in even having a conversation because I can't speak rationally to you about it.
Here's what I think,
if you don't at least respect LeBron. If you think MJ's 1, that's great. But I just think so many times I saw tweets where it was like, LeBron's awful. Look at MJ did. Look what MJ just did in that episode. LeBron would never do that. He sucks. Like,
yeah.
No.
Well, here's what I think the key part there with your takeaway was the emotional bias. And without a doubt, I think what I started to realize in watching these episodes was it's certainly great and it's amazing to rewatch and almost relive these 90s years where Jordan was so dominant. But for these people who watched it when they were a kid maybe, or that was the reason they fell in love with basketball or something, they're like rewatching it and it's so deeply emotional to them that there's no way they're gonna be able to look rationally and unbiased about this GOAT argument.
Right.
Our
memories are
same with
skewed,
us, John, because for us LeBron is, I mean, maybe you whatever.
No,
we both appreciate the argument that Jordan has, and I think I could
right now he's my number 1. That's what I'll say.
I mean, I could argue for Jordan all day, but I will never I'm always gonna think LeBron's my great, like the GOAT, GOAT, just because I grew up watching LeBron, and no matter like how many documentaries they make or whatever it is, I'm never gonna change my mind. Just like the people like our Uncle Jordan, or Skip Bayless, whatever, our high school biology teacher, Mr. Conan, they're never gonna change their minds because that Jordan was the guy they watched, and I just think it's so hard to be unbiased about it, and I don't think anyone's biased. Anyone's gonna be. We're gonna revisit this. We're all biased.
We're gonna revisit this conversation towards the end, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. We're just about almost halfway through the episode, but next, I think this is another topic that discusses like the theme of the whole documentary. I think, and that is, would the Bulls have won the 1999 NBA title if the team had stayed together? So, Alex, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so my answer is definitely going to be no on that. I do not think the 1999 Bulls would have won the title. And I think what actually happened was actually the perfect ending to Jordan's career. I mean, we talked about Game 6 earlier of the 1998 Finals, and you really can't write a better ending than that. Obviously, we joked about the documentary not showing any of the Wizards' years.
Right.
People like to forget those.
There was like 5 minutes left, and I'm like, wow, they're going to fit all those Wizards seasons into the last 5 minutes of the show.
But anyway, so my reason for thinking they wouldn't win it is a couple things. First, there was a lockout season that year, as a lot of people know. So what happened was there was an extended off season, which would have helped the Bulls as they just came off playing 3 straight finals and they were pretty gassed.
Right,
and
MJ
older.
had like 3 100-game seasons in a row.
But I think what ended up happening, so then after you had the extended period, they started on February 5th and the regular season went through May 5th. So that's 50 games. They played 50 games in 3 months. So that I think actually would have hurt. It did hurt older teams. For example, the veteran teams like the Utah Jazz, who had just played in 2 straight finals, and now they were finally going to get their chance in a league without Jordan. That team lost earlier than expected. Right. I think they lost in the second round or something. And then the Pacers, that we also saw go 7 with Jordan, they lost in the conference finals. And Miami, well, we
were
didn't
the number 1 seed.
We had like some veterans, but whatever. So yeah, I guess a lot of older teams, it hurt them in that playoffs. And that Knicks team that was an 8 seed that no one can understand how they somehow, or at least me looking at the history books, I can't understand how that Knicks team went to the finals. But their young core of players were all below 30. So I think that the Bulls being older, that would have hurt them. And then on top of it, I don't think they would have been able to bring everyone back because they had to pay Pippen a ton of money, and Jordan said that he would have had to do some convincing with Pippen, and then you have to pay. MJ's not going to take a pay cut, right? And then you have to pay Rodman. Meanwhile, Rodman, speaking of the age thing, Rodman only played I wrote it down somewhere.
What, are you talking about the next season?
The next season he played. He played 23 games
with the Lakers.
23 games, and the following season he played 12. So Rodman only gets 35 more games in his whole career. And Rodman is obviously an integral part of their championship teams. I'll just push back quickly. In those games that he played for the Lakers, which obviously, I wasn't there to watch, I just looked up his basketball reference page. He averaged 11 rebounds for him. So he went in, and honestly, it was a small sample size. Yeah, 23 games.
That's half the season, though, right? It was a 50-game season, right, when he played for the Lakers. So I'm saying, listen, maybe you get Rodman for half of that season, and whatever. I'll push back after.
Yeah, so let me, well, and the last thing I did want to say is people are still going to talk about how great Jordan was in those seasons. So, Jordan would have been enough. Jordan would not have been enough in the 99 season if he didn't have Pippen or if he didn't have a Rodman who was on point.
Okay.
And the reason that my evidence for that is in the Orlando season, in the Orlando series when Jordan comes back in 1995 after playing baseball, everyone acts like Jordan was super out of shape and he wasn't as good and he was rusty. Sure, there was a little rust, but if you look at his numbers in the Orlando series, he averaged 31 points, 6.5 rebounds, and nearly 4 assists, and 2.5 steals on 47% shooting. So Jordan was just as good. Those numbers are the same as he was in the previous years and the years after. I think that stat line's even better than his 96 playoff run. But really the problem with that Orlando series was that they didn't have the interior defensive guy. They didn't have Horace Grant. They didn't have Rodman. And so the next year they get Rodman, and that's how they're able to be better. So I don't think MJ, even as great as he was in 99, or he would have been in 99, would not have been enough for this team to have won the championship.
So listen, this is my evaluation of your argument. I think that you have points when you talk about non-basketball factors, right, which was another theme of the documentary. The non-basketball factors are very important. But I think if you're trying to convince me that a Michael Jordan-led team with that team intact, obviously, they were they were tired after playing 3 straight seasons into the finals. But if you're going to try and tell me that from a basketball standpoint, that 8-seeded Knicks without Patrick Ewing because he got injured was going to beat that team in the lockout shortened season, I won't take that. Maybe you think the Duncan-led, Robinson Spurs are. That's fine.
They're not beating the Spurs, even if they get to the finals.
But listen, they get out of the East and they get to the finals. So maybe Jordan goes 6-1. But my argument is just that you can't. The question is this. Would they have won the 99 title if they stayed together? So, yeah, you can say, oh, no, because they wouldn't have been able to stay together because of the money and Pippen wouldn't want to. But listen, I really thought it was interesting at the end of episode 10 when Jordan goes, listen, you think that if you go to Steve Kerr and you go to Rodman and you go to Pippen or you go to all these guys and say 1 more year, sign a contract. You think they're gonna say no? Let's go for number 7. He even said, he admitted, he's like, Scotty would take some convincing, but I think if everyone was back, I think we could have done it.
John, I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you brought that up because that thing for me was the only time in the doc where I was a little bit skeptical about how honest Jordan's being, just because. I think it's being dishonest. Well, let me just tell you, how easy is it to sit back, 20 years later, and just say, "Oh yeah, we wanted to all go for 7. We
so you think he didn't think that?
Here's what I'm saying.
Did he not think that?
It's much easier to say today that they would have gone for it, but Jordan was cooked after the first three-peat, and he even felt like he had nothing left to conquer just because he had beaten everyone. You're telling me that after the 6 titles, Jordan is still just gonna be just as hungry for the 7th one. Plus, all their bodies are cooked. Look at Pippen's back; he couldn't even play through the last game.
He would get help. Listen, you're the one who just talked about it. It was they had a long off season, right? It was 50 games. All I'm saying is this: I don't want to hear basketball reasons that they wouldn't be able to get out of that Eastern Conference, because I think. Like if
you're not beating the Spurs, you're not beating Duncan and
listen,
Robinson.
In sports, we don't know that. You're right. We don't know. Maybe they would have.
No.
Maybe they would have signed some other power forward, and that would help.
They would have had to probably.
They would have had to, right? But and Rodman wasn't the same, right? But again, like I'm just saying is like. From a basketball standpoint, let's take that 98 team and keep it together for one more season, one 50-game season, and then it's February to May, and then in May it's the playoffs. I think because we saw an 8-seeded team, without Patrick Ewing, without their star, get out of the East, and then get swept in the finals, or
but
it was 4-0 or 4-1.
Exactly. Well, that's why
I think. How are you gonna say that Michael Jordan wouldn't get out?
I think the Spurs would have been way too good to have lost to the Bulls team in '99. Additionally, just going back to what Mike said, I'm supposed to believe that a player as powerful as Jordan, like probably the best player of all time, couldn't have, if he really wanted to come back that year, you're telling me he couldn't just go up to Krause and Reinsdorf and demand that they keep Phil? And because Reinsdorf was already willing to offer
that's the other thing
Phil a contract. So you're telling me if he says, pay Scotty, keep Phil, go get the players we need, you're telling me if Jordan went up and did that to them, they would have said no?
Well, listen, again,
I really think if Jordan really wanted to come back for that next year, he could have made it happen.
The question isn't like, should they have stayed together given the logistics and whatnot? Because I was doing some extra reading on this, and I was reading that like Phil Jackson has some philosophy that once it's after 7 years, your message becomes a little less meaningful to your players and something. So Phil got offered the contract. That's what Reinsdorf says in it. But again, I think that I'm answering the question directly. Like, if they stay together, would they win? It's not like, oh, could they have possibly found a way to logistically stay together? Maybe it's true that there's no way they would have stayed together because on Phil's side of it, he would have left, or Scotty was just too, a bitter by the end of it, and, Krause was too upset that he didn't get enough credit and he was going to break up the team no matter what. Like, maybe it all comes down to that, but I'm just saying, if they stay together, I'm just saying, you look at that playoffs.
Well, they're still not beating.
I think they have a shot.
They're still not beating San Antonio. That's
okay. That's your opinion, but I'm saying there's no way for us to see what that. If they were going to show up and not play well, then you have a point there.
Yeah.
But if they're going to show up and be the team that they've been, where they went up 3-0 against the Sonics, then they beat the Jazz in back-to-back years, including the 1998 year when Malone was MVP. Was he MVP that? No, I'm sorry, MJ was MVP that year. But Malone and Stockton together for 2 years in a row, and they were up 3-1 in 98. I thought it was going to be closer than that. Oh, they're limping into the playoffs. And they're limping into
that
the
was
finals.
The documentary.
Utah takes game 1, and then guess what? They won 3 straight. Yeah. So I was kind of like, all right, they're up 3-1 in this 98 season. Like, what? I thought they were going to face some adversity. So,
but the last two games, with Scottie Pippen getting injured and everything.
Right. Anyway, the 2 games, it was closer. But again,
let's move on. But the last thing I'll say is there's a reason no one's four-peated in the modern era.
Other than Steve Kerr.
Who
hopped onto the Spurs in the 99 season and won 4 straight.
So our next question.
Really quickly, let's do this segment.
Yeah. John, I'll start with you. Who or what was your favorite episode, your favorite character, scene? What was your favorite moment of the Last Dance documentary?
So I would say, maybe I can't pinpoint, one episode, but I would just say generally, I loved the stuff on each individual player. Like, they had the Steve Kerr part, which he was one of my favorite guys in it. They had the Dennis Rodman episode, just about how crazy he was and like how he was just like this. He felt like he was this free soul and he couldn't be chained up by this team. He couldn't stay and go to every practice and whatever. And Phil, who was also interesting, they gave his like little backstory. Phil understood this and let Rodman kind of run free, but also had to reel him in at certain points. And then also the Scottie Pippen one in episode 2, and they talk about his contract and everything. But I would say my favorite probably part, maybe not pinpointing one episode, was episode 6, I want to say, transitioning into 7, which talked about, Jordan, it was his competition problem, right? Not his gambling addiction, right? He was super competitive, and I just thought it was funny to watch like the little behind the scenes clips where he's flipping coins against the wall with like the security guards, or like he's I also have heard on the Bill Simmons podcast, he would like bet teammates like whose luggage would come out faster when they were traveling and stuff, like on the carousel. So just like stuff like this, like he was just so deeply competitive, or like playing golf, like 18 holes of golf the day before a finals game, right? So there was all this part, and I think that was so interesting, that storyline, and like then how the media turned on him, and then that's why he had to retire after that 93 season. I just thought that whole part of the documentary was very, very interesting, and was definitely one of the underlying themes about Jordan, just as this super competitive person.
Yeah, definitely. Some of mine that overlap with yours was definitely we always heard about Jordan, just his insane competitiveness, but seeing that the actual off the court manifestation of his competitive disorder was really cool. Just like you mentioned, throwing the coins at the wall, or the playing cards in the plane, everything. That was all really, really fun to watch. And then more generally, just the stuff in that All-Star episode where like he's talking trash with Magic and Bird, or then after the 7-game series with the Pacers, he's talking trash to Bird in the hallway. All that stuff was just great. Like, because I don't know, it's so cool to see that these guys are kind of like normal and just joking around, and they're kind of friendly with one another.
Well, you never see that.
They're like larger than life to us.
And again, like at the time, there's no social media or Instagram Live or like whatever where they can kind of just be themselves, like talking to fans or whatever, which I guess you see more players nowadays do, I guess. But like that's what's so cool about this footage that was like never before seen, that they kept it on ice for 20 years, and then now finally they released it in the year 2020, even though it was still 25 years ago.
And then finishing with my favorite quote, which is one of the I think the greatest quotes of the documentaries, I think in the first or second episode, was Roy Williams, who had been with Jordan at UNC, and he said, Michael Jordan is the only player that could ever turn it on and off, and he never freaking turned it off. Because I think that's one of the best ways. That just kind of encapsulates Michael Jordan as a basketball player.
Yeah, I also would agree with you. I loved like all the behind scenes, like trash talk with Bird and Magic, and especially after the Eastern Conference Finals when it's like, there was some cursing in there, so I won't quote it exactly, but it's just funny. Like Bird was the head coach of the Pacers, who just lost to MJ, and even though they were kind of buddies from the Dream Team and they played against each other, and then they're cursing back and forth at the end, and like that's basically the way that you could say good game to MJ is like you curse him out. So I thought stuff like that was funny. But my favorite one was a Doug Collins one. Who was the coach of the Bulls during the 80s, right before Phil Jackson stepped up. And it was about that shot that he hit in Cleveland to win the series. And it was the reporter after the game asked, what was that play at the end of the game for the game winner, coach? And he says, oh yeah, that was get the ball to Michael and everyone get the F out of the way. So I thought that was hilarious, because he's like basically saying, as a coach, sometimes when you're just blessed to have a player like that, it's like, all right, you take the ball, go hit the game winner, and like sometimes it's as simple as that. And that's basically what it was like. Everyone get out of his way. Michael's gonna win this game for us, and that definitely speaks to how great of a player he was. All right, so lastly, our last question. We kind of already touched on this. Or no, this is not our last question. Second to last question. We already touched on this one a little bit, but Alex, I would ask you, how has the documentary affected the GOAT conversation? So we definitely just started talking about LeBron and whatnot, and generations and emotional bias, but why don't we continue that and finish off that conversation?
Well, first, I actually don't think it should have affected the GOAT conversation. Right. Like, essentially, all this stuff is stuff that was like knowledge. Like, this was all on the internet. I guess we never saw the footage behind the scenes, but all this stuff, we knew Jordan had won. We knew his crazy stat lines. We knew pretty much all this stuff, so I don't think it should have affected the GOAT conversation.
Yeah, I agree with you. We knew everything about Jordan as a basketball player already before the doc.
I guess for me, it's kind of made me think even more that this is just really impossible to pick, because what I will say that this documentary enlightened me about is how different the game was. And I spoke earlier about how the super teams of today are predicated on offense and almost only offense. Meanwhile, those Bulls super teams were all defense, really. So it just, and the low scoring games, and just like the league is so different, especially with the 3-point line and everything that's changed with that, and the Rockets and the analytics and Steph Curry. But so I guess it's just so different that it's really like, it's so dumb to me to even try to pick, because if the argument's like, oh, who would have succeeded, like would the Jordans have succeeded better in this era or that era, or would LeBron have succeeded more? That's a different argument. But to me, it's just try to say the greatest. Like, I think you can I truly believe you can make an argument for either LeBron or Jordan. You want to throw Bill Russell, Kareem in there, like, sure, do that too.
Yeah.
But I guess I don't think for me it's changed much. But I will say, I mean, obviously with this documentary, I can't have watched this documentary without having more respect and more admiration for Michael Jordan, obviously.
Right. Yeah, I kind of think it's almost like, I think a change needs to happen with how this conversation is had. It can't just be like, Jordan's the GOAT, LeBron sucks, and then, like, that's what the older guys say, LeBron's soft and he's weak, and that's the superstars of today. Or, like, us young guys, who, me and Alex have definitely been in this camp before, I would like to say that we've matured and changed, but, we're like, oh no, LeBron's the GOAT, MJ played against, like, bad competition and, back in the day in the 80s, and then, they were 72-10 because there was a league expansion and the talent was watered down.
Still true. That's true.
But yeah, but again, I want to say, like, it has to be less emotional. It has to be like, listen, I acknowledge these are two. I want to say I have a problem if you say that these two, that MJ and LeBron, aren't the two greatest players of all time. If you say that LeBron is, behind Kareem or Magic or Larry or whatever, I would argue that. I would argue against that, and I do have a problem with that. But as long as you're saying, listen, LeBron's 1, Jordan's 2, and this is why, and I think that because X, and I think a conversation, an argument can be had, no, Jordan's number 1 and LeBron's 2, and this is the reason why. I'm okay with that. I just think it can't be so emotionally charged, which, listen, like I've said, I grew up when I was 12 and 13 when the Miami Heat repeated, and when LeBron James won championships, and I'm looking at this player as LeBron James as, he's like a god in my eyes when I was watching those Heat teams that I was rooting for, and he was my GOAT, and he is my personal GOAT, right? It's like saying, oh, my favorite artist is right now is Rex Orange County, but I know he's not like the greatest artist ever, right? I know he's not better than the Beatles, but so I think people can have their personal like favorite player, their personal GOAT, right? Like maybe if you're a Laker fan, it's Kobe. Kobe's the greatest player of all time, or it's Magic or whatever. But I think you have to acknowledge when you're talking about the more objective things, I think you have to be, like I said, less emotionally biased and more respectful of like, all right, if it's LeBron or Jordan, it's close, but, I accept your argument.
I think, John, what you actually just mentioned is why it's impossible for this conversation to ever become non-emotional or unbiased. Because I mentioned this kind of earlier, is like when people were watching Jordan, and they were just reminded of how Jordan was to when they watched him. But when people were watching him, they were watching and saying, like, they were in awe, and they were like, there's no way anyone will ever be greater or who has ever been like greater. Same with us. When we watch LeBron and we're so shook by what he's doing, it's like there's no way Jordan was better than this guy,
right?
Because this is in front of our eyes. So it's so deeply emotional and biased that this debate will continue forever until Giannis or Zion
even think
wins
about
5 rings. Or whatever.
Kids nowadays who are 5, 6 years old, 7, they're going to be growing up watching Zion and Luka Doncic and Jason Tatum, and maybe one of those guys who they're going to be arguing, oh, those guys are way better than LeBron, and they're not even going to ever know anything about Jordan, who they never would have watched ever, or maybe they don't even watch LeBron if they're kids now, if LeBron retires in a few years. So I just think it's going to happen for generations. And listen, if you acknowledge that, the game is getting better, the technology is better, the shoes are better, the doctors are better, and all this type of stuff is better, there's going to be a point where there's a player that's better than Michael Jordan in the next 100 years, a player that's better than LeBron James in the next 100 years. And one last thing I would say before we finish off this conversation is that I think that it's crazy that people are writing off LeBron. We're saying, no, he'll never pass Jordan. That's another problem I have with it. Because, again, LeBron's playing right now. Was LeBron going to win this championship this season if coronavirus didn't, suspend the NBA season? Maybe not. But obviously, they had a shot to.
We'll see. And things are looking up.
Right. If the NBA comes back, hopefully we could do another episode on that one. Hopefully that happens. And, listen, I hope that LeBron does win it. I would put my money on it because they seem like they were the most complete team right now at this time before the season ended. So would he win? Maybe he wins again next year against KD and Kyrie and the Nets. And then now he has 5 championships, and he repeated again.
But see, there's all the ifs.
Those are huge ifs. Like, will LeBron win? Maybe, maybe not. But so we can't say. But I think it's ridiculous to count him out because he's on the trajectory to surpass Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as the all-time leading scorer. And he's going to be top, I want to say, 5 in assists. He's already top 10 in assists.
Yeah.
And for rebounds, he's not going to pass, all the centers. He's not going to pass, Dwight Howard probably. But I think for his position, for his size, he will get, to top, I want to say, 3 for his height, for a guy who's 6'8" and under.
Yeah, and really quick before we go to the next question, I guess, my conclusion, you mentioned all the points, rebounds, assists that LeBron is accumulating. And I guess that's what my conclusion about this debate was, that Jordan is probably the greatest winner ever, and I think he's the greatest winner in all sports just because of 6-0. Like I said, no one really had 0 finals losses.
In his era, no one could beat him.
And anyone, yeah. And then LeBron, to me, is just the greatest basketball player in all time in that he's better at more things than Jordan is on the basketball court, except for maybe free throws. That's it. But so Jordan, you can't deny the winningness of Jordan, and for LeBron, to me, his all-around dominance at the game of basketball makes him just a better basketball player. Doesn't mean he's a better winner, but
for sure. But people, again, Alex, people would probably disagree with you on that. So
let us know.
Yeah.
Hit us up, text us,
DM us, tweet
us,
on
tweet
Twitter
us at @doubletake_. All right, so our last question before we wrap things up. We've seen a lot of NBA documentaries on 30 for 30 or ESPN, they've all been great. I really like a lot of them. The Lakers-Celtics rivalry was really good. We saw that one, which was between the 60s and 80s. Then we saw the Bad Boys. Chronologically, the way the NBA went, they kind of marked all the bases. So we had the Lakers-Celtics, like I said. Then we had the Bad Boys. And now we have Jordan. And then there was also the Orlando Magic teams.
Yeah, that's one I have not watched. I got to watch that.
I don't think I've watched it either, but I just remember they made that one.
So
we've almost seen from the 60s until about 2000. We've seen just about every important basketball storyline portrayed in a documentary. So what documentary, John, are they going to make next? Are we going to see a Spurs one, Shaq and Kobe Lakers one, the Heat one, Golden State? Who's next? Which one would you make, or which one would you pick?
Yeah, first I would say, I remember a few years ago thinking about, especially after LeBron left, wow, what an incredible sports story. That I was probably in middle school or early high school. I was probably 14 or 15 at the time.
No, we were 14, I think, yeah.
Right, when LeBron had left, and I was thinking, wow, what an incredible story. LeBron came, and Chris Bosh joined, and 4 seasons we were, the best team. And I just thought, I was wow, there's been nothing like this, which obviously I was just ignorant and didn't know much about, basketball history at the time. And that was the one I was oh my God, I'm going to show my kids, there's going to be a documentary, in 20, 30 years from now and talking about how great these teams were and whatever. And you could definitely make that argument. But, after Kobe's death, I think that's the only answer right now. And I think that Kobe's the next one. Kind of how you talked about chronologically, we got basically from the 60s through the 80s and 90s from the Lakers and Celtics documentary. We saw the Bad Boy Pistons one. Now the Jordan one covered the 90s. So basically now you got to get into the 2000s through the 2010s, the past 20 years, which I would basically say, a basketball historian probably look at it saying 2000s was, Kobe, Shaq, the Spurs and Duncan, and then into the 2010s is basically LeBron, and then into the Golden State, and Kawhi's in there somewhere, KD's in there. But I would probably say they have to make one about Kobe, and I think Kobe's life, because what better follow-up one to The Last Dance?
Kobe's would be special,
coming right after, the player like Kobe who mimicked a lot of what Michael Jordan did, and even in the documentary he said, I don't win 5 without Michael Jordan, which I thought was a very powerful quote.
Yeah, and I think the Kobe one would be special because you could cover from that first three-peat, or even Kobe getting drafted in 96 to that three-peat.
Well, you covered during MJ's time, right? His last three-peat to the 90 through the 99
and then
season.
You can go all the way until Kobe retires.
Which is 2016 he retired.
So that would be cool. But I will.
20 years right there.
I do think an underrated one. I feel like most people wouldn't think about the Spurs one. We've seen on ESPN. It's like, what should they make a documentary about next? Kobe, LeBron, or the Golden State?
Yeah,
and
they deserve.
I think
they're great, but
I think it
wouldn't be interesting.
The Spurs one. See, that's what you say. The Spurs one would be more interesting than you think. I think just because.
Yeah, like late
They're
draft
kind of
picks, like they find like Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili. Like Ginobili went like 57 in this number 57 out of 60 picks in the NBA draft. So it's like,
well, just that they
scouted these guys and brought
they
the
won
team
their
together.
first championship in '99 and the last one in 2014. So that's just like such a wide range of like stories and things.
Well, but you know what? That
for them
is
to have
Tim Duncan. He was the only
and
player.
And Greg Popovich. That's what I'm saying.
right.
So you centered around Duncan and Popovich, and then you could talk about Kawhi, maybe why Kawhi left. I don't know. I think that one would be more interesting than people think. I'm biased though. Give me a LeBron one with the Heat. Give me him trashing Durant on why when he went to the Golden State. Give me that one. So that's what I want.
And I would say lastly, I also think about this as like when I look at my Mount Rushmore. You know, I got like, you know, LeBron, Jordan. LeBron definitely has to finish his career out before we can talk about having a documentary about him.
Sure.
But LeBron, Jordan, I think Bill Russell, and then Magic and Larry were all covered basically. Those are other Mount Rushmore guys. Were all covered in the Lakers Celtics one.
Yeah.
So I think the next guys up are definitely like, you know, Duncan, Shaq, Kobe,
Kobe.
obviously, like I mentioned.
For sure. All right. Well, that wraps things up on the most ambitious crossover event of all time. Don't forget, this was Quarantines and Double Take.
Thank you for listening.
Pretty special. Yeah, thank you everyone for listening. Please stay tuned to the next coming weeks. John and I are officially on summer. We're going to be, you know, getting summer jobs, doing other things, maybe online internships. But we will have a lot more time to be making podcasts. So please tune in. Thank you guys for listening. Peace out.